He's just a friend from work." That's what she said. Casual, unbothered, not even looking up from her phone. And for a long time, a quiet man believed her, or told himself he did, because he loved his wife, because he trusted his marriage, because he was the kind of man who absorbs things and keeps moving. He went to work, he came home, he picked up her dry cleaning. He sat at her mother's dinner table and smiled through 11 years of being called comfortable like it was something to be ashamed of. But then he followed her. And what he saw, a corner booth, a hand on an arm, a laugh that didn't belong to him anymore, cracked something open. Not his heart, his patience. Because what his wife didn't know, what her family didn't know, what the man in the expensive suit sitting across from her at that restaurant had never once thought to ask, was that the quiet man they had all spent 11 years underestimating had been the silent financial backbone of everything they thought they'd built without him. Every deal, every title, every key to every property, funded by the man they forgot was in the room. This is the story of what happens when the wrong person finds out they hold all the cards. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this drop every week, and you do not want to miss them. And if this one already has you locked in, go ahead and drop a like right now. Tell me where you're watching from today, or drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. And now let me take you back to where this all started. A dinner table in Memphis, 40 guests, string lights, and a woman squeezing another man's hand in front of her husband like he wasn't sitting close enough to count her fingers. The table was long and loud and full of people who had never once asked Marcus Dillard how his week was going. Gloria Preston's dining room could hold 40 people if you arranged them right, and Gloria always arranged them right. The good china was out. The centerpiece was fresh flowers, yellow roses and white hydrangeas, something she'd seen in a magazine and replicated exactly. Gospel played low from the kitchen speaker, just loud enough to signal the kind of household this was. Everything in Gloria's home was a signal. Marcus had understood that within the first 6 months of knowing her, and he had spent 11 years since then being fluent in a language he was never meant to speak. He sat near the middle of the table, between a cousin of Vanessa's he had met 3 times and a church friend of Gloria's he had met twice. Both conversations had stalled before the bread was passed. He was used to that. At Preston family gatherings, Marcus Dillard existed in the way furniture exists, necessary for the room to function, unremarkable enough not to discuss. Vanessa sat 4 seats down, and she was luminous. That was the word for it. She had worn the burgundy dress he liked and done something different with her hair, and she was laughing at something Devon Holloway said before she had finished her first glass of sweet tea. Devon sat directly across from her. He had been introduced to the table as Vanessa's mentor, her champion at Holloway and Crane, the man responsible for her trajectory. He wore a jacket that cost more than Marcus's truck payment. He had the kind of handshake that came with a business card. Marcus had shaken that hand at the door. The announcement came between the main course and the birthday cake. Vanessa actually stood, like she was giving a toast, and told the table that she had been promoted to Vice President of Business Development at Holloway and Crane Development Group. The room responded the way Preston family rooms always responded to good news delivered by a Preston, warmly, loudly, with the specific energy of people who had expected nothing less. Then Vanessa looked at Devon and said she couldn't have done it without him. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Marcus watched her fingers close around Devon's knuckles. He watched Devon smile, not the smile of a colleague receiving public thanks, but the smile of a man receiving something he felt he had earned. He watched 40 people applaud and take it as nothing more than professional gratitude. He watched all of it, and then from across the centerpiece, across the yellow roses and white hydrangeas, and the good china Gloria saved for occasions that mattered, Gloria Preston looked directly at Marcus and smiled. It was a small smile, controlled. The smile of a woman who had been waiting a long time to feel confirmed in something she had always believed. She held his eyes for just a moment before turning to join the applause. Marcus picked up his fork and finished his food. The drive home was quiet in the way that a house is quiet after a door has been closed too hard. A specific, loaded silence that neither of them moved to break. Vanessa was on her phone before her seatbelt clicked. Marcus drove the way he always drove, 2 hands, steady speed, watching the road. He asked her, somewhere on Poplar, who Devon was to her. She didn't look up. "He's just a friend from work, Marcus," she said. "Don't start." He didn't start. He drove the rest of the way home without another word and filed those 7 words in the place he kept things that mattered, quietly, precisely, where he could find them when he needed them. 3 days later, he picked up Vanessa's dry cleaning. He still did things like that. Still made her coffee in the mornings when he was up first. Still carried the dry cleaning in from the car and hung each piece in the closet before she asked. He moved through the marriage the way a man moves through a house he has lived in so long he no longer has to think about where anything is. Out of habit. Out of something that still resembled hope. The business card was in the breast pocket of her blazer. Holloway and Crane Development Group, Devon Holloway, Principal, a personal cell number written on the back in ink that wasn't Devon's handwriting, and below the number, also in handwriting, he recognized immediately as Vanessa's, a property address, Germantown, a street he didn't know. Marcus stood in the kitchen with the card in his hand for a long time. The refrigerator hummed, the gospel station was off, the house was completely still. Then he set the card on the counter, looked at it for another long moment, and put it in his wallet. The following Saturday he told Vanessa he was going to check on a property. She said fine without asking which one. He followed her to Magnolia Grill on Poplar Avenue instead. He parked across the street at 12:15 and watched Devon Holloway hold the door for his wife with the ease of a man who had done it many times before. He watched them settle into a corner booth by the window. He watched Vanessa touch Devon's forearm and leave her fingers there half a second longer than a colleague ever would. He watched Devon lean forward. He watched Vanessa not lean back. Marcus sat in his truck for 43 minutes. He did not go inside. He did not reach for his phone. He drove home, reheated the coffee from that morning, and sat at the kitchen table until the afternoon light shifted and the room went dim around him. He was not falling apart. He was thinking. The slow, deliberate thinking of a man who has just measured the full size of a problem and is deciding what it deserves, and that address in Germantown was still in his wallet. He decided it was time to see what was there. To understand how Marcus Dillard got to that kitchen table, sitting in the dark with cold coffee and a business card in his wallet, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning. The quiet one. Marcus grew up in Whitehaven, on a block where people took care of their yards and their business in equal measure. His mother worked the early shift at a medical supply warehouse. His father drove a city bus for 22 years without missing a scheduled route. Nobody in the Dillard house talked about wealth. They talked about reliability, about showing up, about being the kind of person a neighborhood could count on. Marcus absorbed all of it the way a sponge absorbs water, completely, without announcement. He started his postal route at 24. He liked the work more than people expected him to. There was a logic to it, a geography, a satisfaction in knowing every house on every street in his assigned section of Memphis the way a man knows his own reflection. He learned which porches sagged and which had been reinforced. He learned which properties had been neglected and which were being quietly transformed. He started paying attention to real estate the way some men pay attention to box scores, obsessively, privately, with a growing sense that there was a pattern in it he could learn to read. In the second year of his marriage to Vanessa, he bought his first investment property, a duplex in Fraser, distressed, purchased for $62,000 at a county auction. He renovated it himself on weekends with tools he already owned and skills he had been accumulating since his father first handed him a hammer at 11 years old. He rented both units within 6 weeks. He said nothing to anyone except the bank. By year 3, there were 3 properties. By year 3, there was also Dillard Quiet Capital. The LLC was Reginald Fossey's suggestion. Marcus had found Fossey through a referral from a man on his postal route, a retired contractor who said Fossey was the kind of lawyer who thought 3 moves ahead and charged accordingly. Marcus paid accordingly and never once regretted it. Fossey set up the structure through a registered agent in Raleigh, clean and invisible, with Marcus as the sole beneficial owner behind 2 layers of holding companies. It was not deceptive, it was simply private. Marcus had learned early that the moment you tell people what you have, they begin deciding what you owe them. He never told Vanessa, not because he didn't trust her then, but because it never felt like the right moment, and then the moments kept passing, and then the structure of their marriage calcified around his silence on the subject the way a house settles around an unlevel foundation. Everything still functional, but nothing quite straight. The Preston family had opinions about everything Marcus was and was not. Gloria ran those opinions like a household. She had been a school administrator for 30 years, and she brought to her family the same energy she brought to staff meetings, orderly, precise, and completely convinced of her own authority. She never raised her voice at Marcus. She didn't need to. Gloria's contempt operated through vocabulary. She called him comfortable. She called him steady. She told Vanessa within Marcus's earshot at a Sunday dinner in year 4 that it was good to have a reliable man, said it the way you'd say it about a used appliance that still ran. Marcus ate his pot roast and said nothing. Vanessa started at Holloway and Crane Development Group in year 5 of their marriage, and the change in her was gradual enough that Marcus kept explaining it away. Longer hours, new colleagues, a different kind of tired when she came home. He told himself it was ambition, which he respected, and growing pains, which he understood. Devon Holloway was introduced into conversation around the same time, first as her supervisor, then as her mentor, then as the man who saw what Vanessa was capable of when others had missed it. Marcus noted the escalating language. He filed it. He kept moving. The investment portfolio kept growing too, quietly, invisibly, the way water carves rock, not through force, but through patient repetition. By year 6, Dillard Quiet Capital held 7 properties and had begun deploying capital into a promising new real estate development firm operating across the Memphis metro area. The firm was called Holloway & Crane. Marcus did not know that yet. His capital moved through the Raleigh firm and into a blind investment pool. The name on the receiving end was irrelevant to him. The return projections were not. Vanessa's emotional withdrawal accelerated in year 6 and became undeniable by year 7. She stopped asking about his roots. She stopped sitting at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings. She became defensive about her schedule in the particular way of a person who has started organizing their life around something they have not disclosed. Marcus noticed all of it. He did not yet know what to do with what he noticed, but he still believed in the marriage. He still made her coffee. He still picked up the dry cleaning without being asked. He still sat across from Gloria at Sunday dinners and answered her pleasant, devastating questions about how work was going with the same measured patience he brought to everything. He was still, at the end of year 7, a man who believed the thing he had chosen was worth protecting. Year 8 would correct that belief one insult at a time. The street in Germantown was quiet on a Sunday morning in the way that money makes things quiet. No traffic, no noise bleeding from neighboring yards, just the sound of Marcus's truck engine cooling in the stillness after he cut the ignition. He sat for a moment before he got out. He looked at the property the way he had looked at hundreds of properties over the years, reading it, taking inventory. The sod was new, laid within the last few weeks. The mailbox had been painted recently, black with clean edges. The front windows had been replaced, the frames still showing the faint outline of new caulking that hadn't fully cured. Somebody had put real money into this house, somebody with access to good contractors and no reason to rush. Marcus got out of the truck and walked to the front door. He tried the first key on his investment ring, out of habit. Nothing. He tried the second key, the one tagged to a property group he had deployed through Dillard Quiet Capital 3 years prior, and felt the deadbolt turn with the smooth, unhesitating precision of a lock that had been recently installed and well maintained. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit him first, sawdust and fresh paint and the particular dry scent of new drywall, the smell of a renovation in its final stages. His renovation. He recognized the flooring immediately. Wide plank, white oak, the same specification he had approved for 3 other properties in that investment group. He recognized the light fixtures in the hallway. Brushed brass, ordered in bulk from a supplier in Nashville he had used twice before. He walked to the kitchen and saw the cabinet hardware, the countertop profile, the tile backsplash pattern. Every choice was his. Every material had come from his budget. Every decision had been executed by contractors working for Dillard Quiet Capital. On the kitchen counter, held down by a tape measure, was a project timeline printed on Holloway and Crane letterhead. Devon Holloway's logo, Marcus Dillard's money. He stood in that kitchen for a long time. Then he took out his phone and called Reginald Fossey. Fossey picked up on the second ring, the way he always did, and Marcus told him he needed a meeting first thing Monday morning. Fossey asked no questions. He said 7:30 and hung up. That was the thing about Fossey. He had been handling Marcus's affairs long enough to understand that when Marcus called without explanation, the explanation would be worth hearing. Fossey and Associates occupied the 4th floor of a building on Main Street downtown, modest from the outside, precise on the inside, the kind of office that communicated competence without performing it. Marcus arrived at 7:25. Fossey was already at the conference table with 2 folders open in front of him and coffee waiting. Marcus placed the business card on the table. He told Fossey the address. He told him about the key. Fossey looked at the card for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened his laptop, typed for less than a minute, and turned the screen toward Marcus. Holloway and Crane Development Group was listed as the operating entity on 4 properties currently held within the Dillard Quiet Capital portfolio. Not 1 property. 4. Marcus had deployed capital through a blind investment pool managed by the Raleigh firm, and the Raleigh firm had placed that capital with Holloway and Crane as the development partner on a package of Memphis area acquisitions. The arrangement had been legal, arm's length, and completely invisible in the way Fossey had designed the entire structure to be. Marcus had approved the investment pool without knowing the downstream operator. Devon Holloway had accepted the capital without knowing the upstream source. Neither man had known they were connected until now. Fossey pulled out the portfolio map. A single printed page showing all 14 properties currently held under Dillard Quiet Capital, with the 4 Holloway and Crane properties highlighted. Total deployed capital across those 4, $4.3 million. Current combined estimated value, $7.1 million. Devon Holloway had taken Marcus's money, developed it aggressively, and built a portfolio that was now worth nearly double what it had cost. He had built his entire professional reputation on Marcus Dillard's capital. Then Fossey explained the mechanism, and the room got very still. The original investment agreement, signed 3 years ago by Devon's own attorneys without apparent scrutiny of the fine print, contained a majority investor consent clause. Every transaction Holloway and Crane executed within the portfolio required written approval from the majority capital provider. Dillard Quiet Capital held 58% of the investment stake. Devon could not sell, refinance, encumber, or transfer a single property in that portfolio without Marcus's written consent. He never had. He had simply proceeded quarter after quarter, assuming the silent investor would remain silent. Fossey then pulled up a corporate filing on his screen and walked Marcus through Vanessa's VP title. No board resolution, no employment contract independent of Devon's discretionary authority. Her salary, her expense account, her company car, all drawn from Devon's personal operating budget, which was itself funded by returns from the portfolio. The portfolio Marcus owned the majority of. Devon had invented a title for Marcus's wife and paid for it with Marcus's money. Marcus sat with all of this for a long moment. He looked at the portfolio map. He looked at the investment agreement. He looked at the business card Vanessa had written on in her own handwriting, the address she had given Devon for a property she had no idea belonged to her husband. He looked up at Fossey. "What can we do?" Marcus said, "and how clean can we make it?" Fossey reached for the second folder. The one Marcus now understood had been sitting there since before the meeting started, as though Fossey had spent the weekend preparing for exactly this question. He opened it and set it on the table between them. The folder Fossey set on the table between them contained 11 pages. Marcus knew because Fossey always numbered his pages, and the last number visible at the bottom of the stack was 11. Fossey had spent the weekend preparing this, which meant Fossey had understood, from a single phone call on a Sunday morning, exactly what Marcus was going to find when he drove to that address in Germantown. That was what Marcus paid him for. Fossey turned to the third page and set it in front of Marcus without ceremony. It was a reproduction of Section 14, subsection 100 of the original Dillard Quiet Capital Investment Agreement, the agreement Marcus had signed 9 years ago, the agreement Devon Holloway's attorneys had reviewed and apparently never read with sufficient attention. The language was dense, but Fossey translated it in 2 sentences. Any majority capital provider holding 50% or more of the invested stake retained the right to invoke a full portfolio audit at any time, with written notice delivered through the registered agent, triggering an immediate 90-day suspension of all transactional activity pending audit completion. No sales, no closings, no refinancing, no new encumbrances on any property within the portfolio. 90 days of complete stillness. Marcus read the paragraph himself. He read it twice. Then he looked up at Fossey and asked what Devon currently had in motion. Fossey turned to page 5. 3 pending transactions were listed with clean precision. A residential sale in Cordova under contract at $340,000, a commercial refinancing on a strip property in Midtown valued at $290,000, and a mixed-use development closing in Collierville that represented the largest single transaction Holloway and Crane had ever executed. $170,000 in fees alone, tied to a $460,000 closing. Combined exposure across all 3, just over $800,000 in anticipated revenue. All 3 were time-sensitive. The Cordova buyer had a rate lock expiring in 31 days. The Midtown refinancing had a lender commitment letter with a 45-day window. The Collierville closing had a hard deadline written into the purchase agreement. A 90-day freeze would kill all 3, not wound them, not delay them, kill them. Buyers would walk, lenders would withdraw commitments. Devon would lose $800,000 in revenue in a single quarter, with no legal recourse and no path to acceleration, because the freeze was a contractual right, not a hostile action. It was simply the majority investor exercising a provision that had always existed and that Devon's own attorneys had failed to flag. Then Fossey turned to page 7 and explained First Southern Commercial. Devon's primary banking relationship was with First Southern Commercial, which had extended him a $2.1 million revolving line of credit secured against the Holloway and Crane portfolio. The line of credit was reviewed quarterly. The next quarterly review was scheduled in 6 weeks. When First Southern Commercial's review team ran their routine analysis and discovered that the portfolio underpinning Devon's credit line was frozen, that no transactions could close, that revenue projections had collapsed, that the majority investor had invoked audit rights, suggesting internal dispute, the bank would have no choice but to flag the credit as impaired. A $2.1 million line of credit called immediately due. Fossey explained this without drama, the way a surgeon explains a procedure, not to frighten, but to inform. This was the anatomy of Devon Holloway's financial life, and Fossey had mapped every organ. Marcus sat with it for a moment. He thought about the corner booth at Magnolia Grill. He thought about Gloria Preston's smile across the centerpiece. He thought about 11 years of being called comfortable by a woman who had never once asked how comfortable exactly he had been building himself to be. Then he told Fossey to proceed. His instructions were precise. The audit clause invocation would originate from the Raleigh registered agent, not from Memphis, not from any entity Devon could trace back to a postal worker from Whitehaven. The certified letter would be signed by the Raleigh firm's managing partner on behalf of Dillard Quiet Capital. Devon would receive notice of a routine majority investor audit. Nothing threatening, nothing personal, just the clean exercise of a contractual right. The letter would not contain Marcus's name. It would not contain anything Devon could use to understand what was actually happening until it was already too late to stop it. After the letter, nothing, no calls, no follow-up, no escalation. Marcus would go home, make his coffee, drive his postal route, pick up Vanessa's dry cleaning if she asked. He would behave like a man who knew nothing, because the man who knew everything understood that the most powerful thing he could do now was wait. The market would do the rest. Fossey drafted the letter while Marcus sat in the conference room. It took him 14 minutes. He printed 2 copies, one for the file, one for Marcus to review. The language was flawless, formal, precise, and completely devastating in its ordinariness. It read like 1,000 other audit notices. It gave Devon nothing to fight and nowhere to run. Marcus read it. He nodded once. He signed the authorization form authorizing the Raleigh firm to send it on behalf of Dillard Quiet Capital. He dated it. He slid it back across the table to Fossey. He drove home. Vanessa was not there. He reheated leftovers and ate at the kitchen table alone, listening to the gospel station low on the counter, and he felt something settle in him like a foundation that had finally been laid correctly after years of building on ground that was never quite level. The certified letter left the Raleigh office on a Tuesday morning, tracked, signed for required. Devon Holloway received it on Thursday. Devon Holloway opened the certified letter on a Thursday morning at his desk on the 3rd floor of his office building on Madison Avenue, and for a long moment he simply stared at it. The letterhead was from a law firm in Raleigh he had never heard of. The language was formal and precise. A majority capital provider holding 58% of the invested stake in the Holloway and Crane portfolio was invoking its contractual right to a full audit, effective immediately. All transactions suspended pending completion. 90 days minimum. Devon read it twice. Then he called his attorney. His attorney called him back in 20 minutes and delivered the news with the flat, careful tone of a man who has just read something he cannot fix. The clause was valid. The invocation was proper. There was no procedural error to challenge, no bad faith argument to construct, no injunction to seek. The majority investor had done nothing wrong. They had simply exercised a right that Devon's own legal team had apparently read past 3 years ago, without flagging it as the loaded weapon it was. Devon hung up and sat very still. The first buyer walked the next morning, the Cordova sale. The rate lock was expiring and the buyer's agent sent a single email, polite, final, no hard feelings. And that was $340,000 in pending revenue, gone before the weekend. The second buyer lasted until Monday. The Midtown refinancing lender pulled their commitment letter at 9 in the morning, citing the transaction freeze as a material change in circumstance. $290,000. Gone. By Tuesday, Devon's assistant was fielding calls he didn't want to take. The Collierville closing was the one that hit hardest. $460,000 in transaction value, $170,000 in fees alone, the biggest single deal Holloway and Crane had ever put together. The buyer's attorney sent a formal notice of contract termination. The hard deadline in the purchase agreement had not moved, and the freeze had made it impossible to meet. 3 buyers, $800,000, 72 hours. Devon started calling people. The people stopped answering. It happened gradually, then completely, the way these things always do. A developer he had lunched with monthly went quiet. An introduction he had been promised at a commercial lending conference was quietly unpromised. 2 men who had been in his corner at every civic function he had attended over the past 4 years suddenly had schedule conflicts. Devon Holloway had spent a decade building a reputation on access and momentum, and both of those things, it turned out, were entirely dependent on the appearance of financial stability. The appearance was gone. First Southern Commercial sent their own letter 12 days after the Rayleigh notice arrived. Routine quarterly review. Flagged irregularity. The $2.1 million revolving line of credit was being called due in full, immediately, pending resolution of the investor dispute. Devon's personal accounts, which his own accountant had been warning him for 2 years, were dangerously commingled with company operating funds, were now fully visible to the bank's review team. What they found there was not enough. The Memphis Business Journal ran a brief on a Wednesday. Holloway and Crane Development Group, liquidity crisis, unnamed investor dispute, 3 pending transactions collapsed. It was 4 paragraphs. It was enough. Devon's phone, which had once rung constantly, went quiet like a room after a door slams. On a Friday morning, Vanessa's direct deposit did not arrive. She checked her account 3 times before she called Devon. He didn't answer the first call, he didn't answer the second. On the 3rd call, he picked up and told her there was a temporary cash flow issue and that everything was being handled, and that she should not worry. She asked him what that meant for her salary. He told her again that everything was being handled. She hung up and sat in her car in the parking garage of the Holloway and Crane building and stared at her phone balance. The company car was repossessed from that same parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon, 11 days later. A man in a grey shirt with a towing company logo walked up while Vanessa was loading files into the back seat and handed her a notice. She called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. She told him what had happened, her voice stretched thin in the way of a person trying to sound composed while standing in a parking garage with her belongings in her arms. Marcus listened. He said he was sorry to hear that. He asked if she needed a ride. She said no. He said to let him know if that changed. He stayed calm the entire call, his voice even and unhurried, the voice of a man with nothing to hide and no reason to rush. He hung up and finished his postal route. Gloria Preston called Vanessa that evening. Vanessa could not explain what was happening in any way that made the situation sound temporary. Gloria called Terence. Terence called Devon directly, using the number he had saved under a first-name basis he now regretted. Devon picked up because Devon still thought Terence might be useful. He was not useful. He was panicked, loud, and demanding answers Devon did not have. When Terence finally asked who the investor was, who Dillard Quiet Capital was specifically, Devon said the words that would echo through the Preston family for years. He said he didn't know. Vanessa moved back to Gloria's house on a Saturday, 2 suitcases, a discontinued corporate card with a 0 balance, a rideshare that dropped her at the curb while Gloria stood in the doorway in her housecoat, watching her daughter walk up the path with luggage, the birthday dinner only 3 weeks behind them. Gloria said nothing. There was nothing to say. Marcus did not watch any of this directly. He heard it in fragments, through Vanessa's clipped phone calls, through the silence that replaced her usual certainty, through the journal article he read with his morning coffee without visible reaction. He observed it from a distance, the way a man observes weather from a window, calm, patient, unsurprised. And then Devon Holloway found a phone number that traced back to a Memphis area code connected to Dillard Quiet Capital's Raleigh registration, and he called it. Marcus answered. Devon had called Marcus looking for leverage and found none. The phone call lasted 6 minutes. Devon had been charming at first, then businesslike, then transparently desperate, as Marcus said nothing useful, confirmed nothing, and ended the call by telling Devon that any formal inquiries should be directed to his registered agent in Raleigh. Devon's attorney called Fossey the next day. Fossey arranged a meeting in the conference room on the 4th floor of the building on Main Street for the following Thursday at 10 in the morning. Devon arrived at 9:55 with his attorney and the particular energy of a man who still believed, despite all available evidence, that the right conversation could reverse what had already been set in motion. He wore a suit. He carried a leather portfolio. He was composed in the way that people are composed when they are working very hard at it. He walked into the conference room and found Marcus Dillard already seated at the table. The recognition moved across Devon's face in 3 distinct stages. The first was confusion, the simple processing of an unexpected presence. The second was a deeper recognition, the kind that comes when a brain begins connecting things it had kept separated. The third was something that looked, for just a moment, like the specific terror of a man who has suddenly understood exactly how thoroughly he has been understood by someone he dismissed. Devon's attorney touched his arm. Devon sat down anyway. Marcus said nothing. He folded his hands on the table and waited. Fossey explained briefly and without embellishment that Marcus Dillard was the beneficial owner of Dillard Quiet Capital and the majority capital provider behind the Holloway and Crane investment portfolio. Devon's attorney began to speak. Fossey raised one finger, and the attorney, to his credit, stopped. Then Vanessa walked in. Fossey had contacted her separately as the spouse named in the marital asset filings connected to the pending divorce proceedings Marcus had authorized the previous week. She had not known Marcus would be there. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room, Devon, his attorney, Fossey, and her husband seated at the head of the table in the quiet, settled way of a man who had been there for a long time. She sat down on the opposite side of the table from Devon. Nobody spoke. Marcus looked at both of them for a long moment. When he began, his voice was level and unhurried, the voice of a man delivering a prepared statement to an audience that no longer had the power to interrupt him. He started at the beginning. Whitehaven, his father's bus route, his mother's early shifts, the postal route he had driven for 16 years and never once been ashamed of, no matter what a certain family in East Memphis had implied about its significance. He talked about the duplex in Fraser, purchased at $62,000 at a county auction in the 2nd year of his marriage. He talked about the LLC he had formed in the 3rd year, quietly, legally, invisibly, because he had learned early that the moment you tell people what you have, they begin deciding what you owe them. He talked about 9 years of slow, patient, disciplined building. 14 properties, $4.3 million deployed, a portfolio that had grown, by the time he finally looked at it through the lens of everything he now knew, to $7.1 million in estimated value. He paused there. Then he looked at Devon directly. He told Devon about the business card, the breast pocket of the blazer he had picked up from the dry cleaner, because he still did things like that, still moved through that marriage like a man who believed in it. He told Devon about the Germantown address written in Vanessa's handwriting. He told Devon about the Saturday he had followed his wife to Magnolia Grill on Poplar Avenue and sat in his truck across the street for 43 minutes and watched Devon hold the door open for her in the way that a man holds a door when he has already decided something. Devon opened his mouth. Marcus kept going. He told Devon about the key on his investment ring, the second key, the one that had opened the deadbolt on the Germantown property without hesitation, because the Germantown property had always belonged to him. He told Devon about the portfolio map Fossey had laid out on this very table, and the moment he had understood, fully, completely, without any remaining uncertainty, that every deal Devon had ever used to make Vanessa feel like she had chosen correctly had been executed with Marcus Dillard's money. He looked at Vanessa then. He told her he had sat at her mother's table for 11 years. He had absorbed every quiet comment about being comfortable and steady and reliable, delivered in Gloria Preston's gracious, devastating vocabulary of contempt. He had watched Vanessa perform embarrassment at his presence at work functions and remain silent when her brother made jokes at his expense and squeeze another man's hand at a birthday dinner in front of 40 people, like Marcus was furniture. He said it slowly and without anger, the way you read a list of facts into a record. Then he said the words he had prepared. "You told me he was just a friend from work, Vanessa. And you spent 11 years letting your mother call me comfortable, like it was something to be ashamed of. But what you didn't know, and what neither of you ever thought to ask, was that every deal Devon Holloway used to make you feel like you'd chosen right, every dinner, every title, every key to every property he ever showed you like it was his. I funded it. Every single one. He built his whole life on my money, and so did you." The room was completely silent. Devon's attorney was looking at his notepad. Devon himself had gone very still, the portfolio unopened in front of him, his composure finally and completely gone. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in the quiet, devastating way of a man who has just watched the ground he was standing on reveal itself as someone else's property. Vanessa made a sound that was not a word. It was the sound of a structure failing, not a scream, not a protest, but something that came from deeper than either of those things. Her hands were flat on the table. She did not look at Devon, she did not look at Marcus, she looked at the surface of the table in front of her, and she stayed very still, and whatever she had believed about her choices, about her life, about the man she had married and the man she had chosen instead, collapsed inward in that moment without ceremony or audience. Marcus stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He turned to Reginald Fossey, thanked him by name, and shook his hand. He walked out of the conference room without looking back. He already knew what came next, because Fossey had already filed it. 6 months after Marcus Dillard walked out of Reginald Fossey's conference room, Holloway and Crane Development Group ceased to exist. The dissolution was not dramatic. It was paperwork. Devon settled his outstanding debts through forced liquidation of the portfolio assets. Assets that, without Dillard Quiet Capital's consent to transact, had been frozen long enough for every leveraged position Devon held to become untenable. He sold what he could at discounts that made people in Memphis real estate circles wince. He paid First Southern Commercial their $2.1 million and walked away from the table with nothing that resembled the empire he had spent a decade assembling. His personal assets, fully exposed during the bank review, covered his obligations and left him with considerably less than his reputation had suggested he possessed. Devon Holloway left Memphis quietly. No announcement, no farewell events, no industry dinner in his honor. He simply stopped appearing in the rooms he had worked so hard to enter, and the rooms moved on without him in the particular, efficient way that money moves on from anyone who no longer has any. His name, which had appeared in the Memphis Business Journal on 3 separate occasions as a rising figure in the city's development landscape, appeared a 4th time in a brief noting the dissolution of his firm. After that, nothing. No partners, no lenders, no path back. The Preston family sustained their own quiet damage in the months that followed. The story of Gloria's birthday dinner circulated the way stories circulate in communities where reputation is the primary currency. Slowly at first, then everywhere at once. The specific detail that circulated most was the hand squeeze. The image of Vanessa reaching across a table to hold Devon Holloway's hand in front of 40 people, including her own husband, while her mother smiled. That image traveled from church pew to church pew, from one Sunday dinner table to the next, landing with the particular weight of a story that confirms what people had quietly suspected for years. Gloria Preston, who had spent decades building a social standing on the precision of her judgment, found that judgment suddenly and publicly questioned. The invitations slowed, the calls thinned. The women who had deferred to her in civic meetings and alumni gatherings began deferring to someone else. It was not dramatic. It was the slow erosion of a reputation by the steady water of a story that would not stop being told. Terence lost his equipment loan. The personal guarantee he had signed 2 years earlier, backed by assets that no longer supported the valuation, was called by the lender when his financial review came due. He filed for personal bankruptcy in the fall. He did not call Devon. Devon would not have answered. Vanessa resurfaced 6 months later in a smaller version of the life she had built. A mid-level position at a property management firm in East Memphis, significantly below the VP title she had carried for the better part of a year. A one-bedroom apartment in a building she never would have considered 2 years prior. She was not named in the final legal proceedings. The divorce was clean, the marital assets divided according to what Marcus had formally disclosed, which was the house and the joint accounts. Dillard Quiet Capital had always been his alone. She had never asked, she had never known to ask. Marcus liquidated his stake in the Holloway and Crane portfolio for $6.7 million. The properties sold well. Memphis real estate, as Marcus had understood for years, rewarded patience. He paid his taxes, he paid Fosse, he kept the postal route for 3 more months because he had always liked the work and saw no reason to stop on anyone else's schedule. Then he retired, quietly, on a Tuesday morning, the same way he had done everything that mattered. He established the Dillard Foundation in the late fall. Its focus was specific and deliberate. First-generation homebuyer grants for families in Whitehaven and South Memphis. The neighborhoods the Prestons of the world had always left as soon as they could afford to. The neighborhoods Marcus had never left, had never been ashamed of, had driven through every morning for 16 years on a route that had taught him to read every property on every street like a language he had been born to speak. The first grant cycle funded 11 families. Marcus attended every closing. He shook every hand. He said very little at each one. He did not need to say much. He met Celeste Warren on a Saturday morning in November at a financial literacy seminar hosted by New Prospect Baptist Church. She was one of the instructors. She taught high school mathematics and had been volunteering at the seminar for 3 years, and she moved through the room with the easy competence of a person who knows their material and has nothing to prove about knowing it. After the session, in the fellowship hall over coffee, and the particular pound cake that church fellowship halls in Memphis have been perfecting for generations, she asked Marcus what he did. He told her. The postal route, the duplex in Fraser, the LLC, the foundation, the whole answer, in the order it actually happened. It took several minutes. She did not look at her phone. She did not look toward the parking lot. She asked 2 follow-up questions that indicated she had been listening to every word of the first answer before asking them. He noticed that. He decided it mattered. Here is what this story is about at its core. It is not about revenge, though the ending was just. It is not about money, though the numbers were real. It is about what happens when the people who underestimate you have built their entire world on the foundation you quietly laid without their knowledge. Marcus Dillard was never the man the Preston family thought he was. He was always exactly who he turned out to be. The only thing that changed was that they finally had to reckon with it. A quiet man is not a weak man, a patient man is not a defeated man, and a man who never told you what he had was not obligated to warn you before he used it. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Marcus's position when you found that business card in the blazer pocket? When you sat in that truck outside Magnolia Grill for 43 minutes and watched the truth walk through a restaurant door? What would your next move have been? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story held you from the first minute to the last, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps this channel reach the people who need to hear stories like this one. And if you are not subscribed yet, the button is right there. New stories drop every week, and every one of them is built to keep you until the very last word. I will see you in the next one.